Hello and welcome to the Angerati studio at Charge 2016. We're joined by Kevin Lane Keller from the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth College. I believe you say Tuck's?
Tuck School of Business.
Tuck School of Business.
Yeah.
Okay, so Kevin, right. This is one of those really cool interviews in the sense that, you're more of you've got the big picture here on branding. This is not just sector specific. So tell me about your day so far at Charge. This is very focused on the energy sector. What are some of the standout points you've seen so far?
Well, I think the day sort of started with a broad session that I was part of, that Jim Rogers, from ex-CEO of Duke Energy, sort of led. And it really was to sort of lay the foundation. And I thought it was just really interesting seeing how the basic branding concepts, many of them, how well they apply. And so talking about brand promises and the importance of differentiation and relevance and customer engagement and understanding how to create positive customer experiences. So, a lot of the different components I thought were really, it was nice to see them validated, which, I certainly believe in it, that's the case. But then also see them, some of the applications. So some of the examples that people were talking about, some of the different kinds of companies, hearing somebody from Shell talk, for example, about what they're doing in Germany. So I thought that combination of seeing how useful the concepts are for those people who are trying to use them, and then getting some of the case studies that give you a sense for what's being successful in the marketplace. And there'll be more of that. We're still early on in the conference. There's a lot more sessions today and tomorrow. But that was sort of my early takeaway, was just the validation of the importance and the applicability of branding in a very dynamic sector, which is these days, which is energy.
Okay, so importance and applicability, and it's clear that intention is there. It's on whatever level people would like to engage it, maybe do more in a particular better way or stronger way. But in your experience, and you've obviously worked with the likes of Disney, I think even in financial services as well, how does this compare? How do you compare some of these more, in my opinion, more mature branded sectors to say what you're seeing here with the power and utilities industry?
I'm lucky because I've worked with basically a lot of really good companies in a lot of different industries. So the Procter & Gamble's and the Unilevers and the Colgates and all the kind of classic consumer products. Now they've discovered branding decades ago, but I've also worked with in the early days companies like Intel, early days with Starbucks. These companies that were discovering marketing and the importance of branding, or even in the kind of sort of like with the energy space. I've worked with like Irving Oil, which is an energy company in the Northeast. I've worked with Shell, worked with other ones, worked with a lot of technology companies. The thing you see is it's often engineering-driven companies. It's always product-driven companies, understanding and appreciating the role of brand. Sometimes I think there's a worry from them that somehow you're invalidating the importance of the product, or somehow rejecting it, and the technology and the innovations, and it's anything but, because the fact is you need to have that great products, great services, great customer experiences. The branding part is how you're going to package all that and deliver all that, what that brand promise is, how you're going to position yourself, how you want people to think of you, and trying to develop this relationship that goes beyond just the product itself, and making that a commodity, making sure it was really differentiated and really relevant. So I'm seeing in this space in energy that those early stages that you often see in industries making this transformation into being more branded, more marketed, more differentiated, trying to be less of a commodity, trying to find and not competing on cost and price. So you're definitely seeing that sort of evolution starting, I think, and it's very appropriate, I think, for this to be happening.
It's really interesting you mentioned Intel there, because I mean, from a consumer perspective, I have a laptop, and I can't relate to one Intel product I bought. I've actually gone out and bought an Intel product. No, somehow in my mind when I think laptop, I think Intel. I think it needs to have an Intel processor, and it's quite interesting, that conversation, that line you're saying for technology companies or engineering-led companies, that it's less about the actual products, but sometimes the context, right? Or better still. And I wanted to ask you a question there, especially quite interestingly, you mentioned Shell, but you didn't mention any electricity companies, so to speak. And is that kind of telling of the electricity sector? Maybe it's something similar like Intel. You know, perhaps they should talk more about Netflix, for example, and getting you to Netflix, or ensuring that, you know, as opposed to say, you know, talking more about thermostats or the grid itself. What do you think?
Well, you always want to make sure, I mean, one of the most important things in branding is to be relevant. And you want to make sure you understand how consumers think, how they feel, how they act, what they care about, what they don't care about. So much of that in this space, you got to make sure you don't get, you know, those new products are great and innovations are great, but they're great because they make people's lives better, that they actually come up with ways to solve problems or just make their lives better, for that matter. So that's always the name of the game, is to make sure that's what you're doing. So I think that's what one of the keys will be, is to take all that innovation and make sure it's truly focused on the customers, and just in general having that mindset and that perspective that it's not either or. It's not about, you know, great products or branding. It's you do both. You want to have great products and services that customers care about, and that's part of that branding process. And just one other quick comment. I just want to go back to Intel for a second, and then we can leave Intel behind. But the thing with Intel, because I worked with them in the very early days, and the thing that people don't realize is, this is literally early 90s when they were just starting this campaign. A lot of people thought they were crazy. They said, you know, you can never brand a mic. You know, who cares what's inside your computer? I want to know whether it's IBM at the time, you know, and who cares about that? And they went through, it's a classic ingredient branding story, but the thing to me that's sort of most important is they differentiated. People believed it was a faster chip, improved performance. So it comes back to saying that people thought that was a commodity, the microprocessor. Turned out it wasn't, one, and two, they created value that they could then benefit from, and that led them to be one of the most successful, for a while, one of the most successful companies around. So again, it just ties into that same notion. If I can deliver on a customer promise to make their lives better, in this case with Intel, faster microprocessor, with energy companies, it's more about energy maintenance and understanding energy reliability, service responsiveness, all the kinds of things that are some of those interactions, then I'm going to benefit from that.
Okay, it's really interesting, that debate with Intel, and that was actually what I wanted to ask you about, like, you know, what it must have been like at the very beginning, before the Intel we know now. In my opinion, I think they beat AMD in that sort of representation space, albeit even though AMD probably has a better processor in my perspective. But there you go, right? Brand image, get there first, tell your story, and tell it better than the next guy. I want to ask you more about sort of the realities of then getting a utility into that sort of thinking. And I guess my first question to you is, from, you know, the interactions you're seeing now and possibly, you know, outside the show, do you think the utility sector, especially electricity, is really ready to embrace this kind of thinking for branding? And feel free to surprise me, maybe say no.
No, I think they're ready. I think being ready is not the same as actually doing it. No, at this point, it's a very dynamic industry in lots of ways. There's lots of technology going on. There's huge movement towards, you know, sustainability, being green, that has to be factored in. There's new sources of competition. So this is a very, very dynamic industry. So it's a natural one for some really, really solid marketing and branding, and again, and really corporate transformations to try to take advantage of market opportunities that didn't exist before. And that's for the existing companies, and that's for newer companies who want to be challengers and want to come in. So I think it's going to be a very dynamic space over the next 5 or 10 years in terms of companies trying to figure out what their place is, where they can be most effective, and where they can find the most, be most productive in the marketplace with their customers, and it's going to be very competitive. And I think when things are competitive, it's when you have to be differentiated. It's really important to have good branding. And the one thing I'll say about that, just to sort of maybe foreshadow something else you might want to talk about, is that one of the important things is, like you're saying, like sort of where are these firms in this process? A lot of it has to be led by top management. So the one experience I've seen, whether it was Intel with Andy Grove or working with American Express with Ken Chenault, the CEO, when the CEO embraces branding or the brand and its importance in making sure that it's about delivering great customer experiences and differentiating and being relevant and all, high quality, all the good things we talk about, all those different things, when that happens, that changes the environment in the atmosphere, the attitudes, and the behaviors of employees within that company. It's a trickle down, and it makes a huge difference. So where I've seen branding less successful is in organizations where that's not been the case, where there hasn't been that top level just embracing and support. You have to have conviction that this truly is, and you've got a brand. It's not, you have a brand, it's just what you do with it. And it's just trying to make sure that you get as much value out of it and manage it properly is really important.
Okay, well, you beat me to that question already, because I was kind of going to, I wanted to ask you really around, what that next step would be. If you're watching this interview and you're thinking, okay, great, so, what do I do next? What would that next step be? Is it literally rock up to the CEO's office and go, dude, you need to get your branding game together? What would that next step be?
So it really is a combination of internal and external branding. So, and really a lot of it's kind of classic marketing, classic sort of starting at the external side, really understanding consumer and competition, and then where your company and your brand fits in. It's sort of, we call it the 3 C's of marketing: customer, competition, and company. And that you really start there, because you got to find out what are those opportunities, what do customers, what are their needs, what are their wants, what are they not getting, what do they want things to be improved, where are those opportunities, and then you've got to figure out what you like to do, and then the question is, that's the desirable side, what's deliverable, what can your company actually do that's differentiating. So take those same 3 C's and then think about, I got to make sure that whatever I do, it's desirable from a consumer standpoint, deliverable by the company, and differentiated from competition. If I do those 3 things, I'm in great shape. So that's kind of where you start, is with that effort, and then that's the more external side, and then once you decide that, then you go on the internal side, top down, ideally, to make sure everybody understands it, embraces it, and then acts in ways that are consistent with that, so they're delivering on that brand promise that goes externally.
Okay, well, you heard it here first, right? Or probably in Kevin's usual deck. Kevin, I got one more question for you, and I know you said we should move past the Intel thing, but I find it really poignant, and it's really relevant to this sector. And this is me thinking, imagine I was a fly on the wall in that conversation you had with Annie Grove right back in the day. What was the tipping point? What was the thing that sort of made them go, by God, we need to do this. We really need to do this now. We need to act. Is it just a competition thing, or shrinking revenues? Because these things are happening right now. Especially in the electricity sector, home residential solar, residential PV, for example, might even take out some utilities reach into the sector. Right. What's going to be that tipping point that will make people really go, we've got to do something? Yeah,
I think it's interesting. I think there's examples where that may be the tipping point, that it's more a sense of urgency. I've got to do something, because if I don't, I'm in trouble, because there's so much competition. I mean, in Intel's case, that wasn't. Intel's was more an opportunity, and where they kind of got their courage it was interesting. They sort of had this happenstance, couple different things they had to do in their branding strategies, couple things they had to do in communication strategy, where it became clear that almost inadvertently they were building a brand, so that people actually started to talk about it and like it and appreciate it, and they realized that gave their products more meaning and made it easier to sell and made it easier to get customer loyalty, which is what branding is all about. In some sense, it's not just about choosing a name or advertising. It's about literally providing customers with great experiences through the products and services, and communicating and branding them well, et cetera. So that was the realization that they had. So that it was more how much upside there was. So for a lot of times, I think for companies starting down this path, it may be based out of urgency, but also, and many times it's trying to seize an opportunity. And often what will really help speed that up is when you start to do things and see how it really helps. And in this kind of space, that can often happen because it's not that well branded. So when you start doing things and explaining to people what my brand, what's my promise, and delivering on that, and people learning more about you and developing that loyalty and having that rich experience, it can really transform things fairly quickly. So that can often be the kind of the impetus for going down this path even faster sometimes.
Okay, so would you say in your words there, and this kind of sort of the Kevin Keller takeaway point for someone watching this interview is kind of start acting now, do something, try something new, try something different.
Yeah, but tries to be smart about it, obviously, and so you try to find just find. It's the notion of, I think, getting closer to customers, and the key is to really understand them in their totality and what their needs and wants are, what they're not getting, and thinking about also the key, I think, for any brand and branding is not thinking about today, it's thinking about tomorrow. So it's always a step in also your past, where you've been, where you are now, where you're going. So, but it's a step in the present, it's a step in the future. So you really have you always want to balance that some, because you want to be forward-looking, but you want to be realistic about where you are. So that's the start point, saying, okay, let's really make sure we know exactly where we are, what are those perceptions, what's competition, what's our company capabilities, where might we go, what sort of opportunities do we have, and then starting making that plan about how you might be able to take that brand in that direction.
Well, I think that's a brilliant place for us to bring things to a close. So thank you very much for those insights, Kevin.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's great to be here. Thanks very much.
And to you, the audience, as well, thank you very much for tuning into this session. If you'd like to hear more about energy, branding, and maybe the wider context of customer engagement and differentiation, please check out the other interviews on the screen. And feel free to check out Enterati for more insights. Thank you.